so intrigued by what you're doing. So you were at first you were in that other school, right? And you were
Mm,
working, just get a little background, you're working with the kids that were this was their last chance, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know how much you know about English special educational needs,
Not too
the
much.
system. So basically, we had this law pass, and then we had this statutory guidance called the SEND Code of Practice, the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Code of Practice. Now, it's a big, lengthy document that's been criticised rightly in numerous ways. But why I bring it up is they have these four broad areas of need, and so you identify a kid who has one or multiple of these four, which is communication and interaction, cognition and learning. I think it's just called sensory. And the last one is social, emotional, mental health. Now, I've spent the last 4 years working in two different schools. And one thing I've realized is that last category of SEMH is just a dumping ground for all the kids that don't fit any of the other stuff, and they don't fit into mainstream. So within one classroom, you could have a non-verbal child with autism and a child with FASD. And you could also have a child with ADHD, someone else who is a young carer, someone else who's in care. And it's literally within, and I'm like, these don't mix well. Like, you've got high energy, low energy, you've got sensitivities, you've got brashness, all in the same environment. And what happens is well, my experience is you have these companies that started out as like quote unquote care companies. So they have residential homes for children, care orphanages. We don't call it that anymore, but essentially that. They call them care homes. And they're places where agency workers often work. Um, we criminalise kids in care quite a lot through simple acts. So, say for instance, if you're a parent, you had a child and they blew vape smoke in your face, you just be like, "How dare you?" And you'd have a conversation, maybe. Do you know what I mean? Whereas these agency workers or these employees of these care companies will ring the police, and then they'll get a criminal record. I think it's 50% of children that have interactions with the police are actually in care,
Oh
because
my
it's just so brutal.
gosh.
And so you've got companies like that who are running these
But they're not
places.
trying to keep them out of the system. They're putting them in the system, in the
Well,
juvenile system.
yeah, it's because there's no care, there's no relationship, there's no actual building of home or family. Because if you're just paid to be there, why are you
Mm.
going to care? Especially when you're paid so little. And so you've got these types of companies that then go, oh, wait, let's start an educational company too. And they don't know how to do that either.
Uh,
And so they're just triggering kids left, right, and center. And I just got fed up. I just got so angry and fed up because you've got very simple things, which is if you're going to change something, inform the children, make a transition.
I love
Simple, right?
that. Yeah.
Never do it. Never do it. They'll change it like that. They'll change it like that because business comes first. And so their sort of structure comes first. And what I realized is these companies are treating, excuse me, these the most vulnerable children in society as cash cows. That's the way I can only articulate it.
Wow, the most
Um,
vulnerable children in are the cash cows. That's
mhm, yeah, because some
yeah.
of these people are like, for a child to go to some of these schools, it costs more than it does to go to Eton, which is like the most prestigious school in the country, which is
Oh
where
my
future prime ministers and
gosh.
leaders go. That's how much they pay to get these kids into school. And then, in my experience, these companies aren't supplying what these kids need, and they're getting paid a ton to do it.
Wow.
And they're employing people who don't train. They're yeah. There's other things like, I'll give you an example. So um, there was a story of someone worked in a school, and it wasn't really fit for purpose. The doors on the maglocks weren't really secure. The kids realised this, and so the kids would just kick the doors open. Their management decided to say, if kids kick the doors, then we're going to physically restrain them. And I'm like, you're maglocking these kids in. You're not giving them any freedom. So often they don't have their phone. I'm 50-50 on that, depending on who it is. So they don't have their phone, they don't have their freedom, they're followed around all the time, they're forced to do a curriculum that is boring, that isn't relevant to them. And what are they going to do? Some of these kids going to get really angry and they just want to get out, just like anybody. Like if you're trapped in a
Really?
place and you're
Oh my
told what to do, and you'd be enraged, and but then they get physically restrained, and I'm like, you're just re-traumatizing.
Wow, yeah, you couldn't, I don't know how you could stay in that. So that's why your shift to your forest schools.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which
And where are you
so
coming from?
Forest,
Where are you right now, physically located?
I'm in my friend's house,
But UK, are you in
Northampton,
the UK or yeah,
Northampton, UK. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Northern France?
Sorry, no, Northampton.
Northampton.
Might be my accent.
Yeah.
Northampton.
I know I'm kind of leaning in. Good thing I'm not
I
deaf
do,
yet. No, I'm getting
I
to that
do. I
point.
also, yeah, I also talk quite quickly, and I didn't realise that the British accent was sometimes hard to understand by Americans until I can't remember where it was, but it was Americans watching a British TV show and they had subtitles.
Okay, I've had to do subtitles on just shows on Netflix.
Yes.
I have. Like
So if
I
you
look at my husband. Did you understand what they said? No, we put the subtitles on because it is.
so if
It's
you need
fast and it's yeah.
yes, if you need me to slow down, I'll try, and if you need me to repeat, just ask.
That's
Um,
funny.
but yeah, the forest school. Basically, I don't know if you have anything similar, but it's essentially outdoor learning. It's just
Yeah, we
outdoor
have some
learning.
schools that do that here in the States
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
yeah. So it's in like the Montessori traditions and sort of that sort of thing. But in England, they call it forest school, which is a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't have to be in a forest and it's not a school. It's more about holistic development. It's more those are the outcomes. The outcomes are child-led. So if that kid comes this week and they need to swing in that hammock for 2 hours, they need to come swing in that hammock for 2 hours. If other kids are into den building, bug safaris, if they wanted to do whittling, fire and cooking, like anything in that. And obviously, to an extent, it starts off as adult led, especially some of the kids I work with, they're sort of play deprived. So they're constantly waiting. They're like, well, tell us what to do. What do we do now? But then there's some kids who are like, I want to play a game, we're gonna play a game, let's do play a game. And you're like, brilliant, let's go play a game. So yeah, it's I won't go through the whole thing, but there's something called the Forest School Association, and they have six principles. And those six principles, sort of, for them, the Forest School Association, they identify what is a forest school. And it's stuff like nature has to be outside in nature, but that doesn't exclude urban, sort of inner city stuff, because if there's a tree or even actually, if you look in some rubble, nature started to take over already. So it's just outside. It's a place where actually you can get some nature. It's got to be long term because what we've realised as a species is development is long term, isn't it? There's so much research out there that says that these sort of learning outcomes to be able to understand within 40 minutes or an hour is sort of nonsense. Actually, if somebody has a year outside, then they calm down. They're not as quick to want to do everything all the time straight away because it's their last opportunity. Instead, actually, you can just take time to be able to learn and grow, and sometimes repeat. You know what I mean? We go in cycles. So sometimes someone will get obsessed with something for a few weeks, and that's what they sort of need. So it has to be long term. Um, and there's a leadership principle, which I think is quite important. It's specifically stating that forest school leaders have to be reflective practitioners, and they have to be lifelong learners themselves. So we're not just observing and reflecting on the young people or the participants, because it can be done with adults. You're also reflecting on yourself in space. So how did I respond to that? Why did I respond to that? Should I have responded to that?
That's an
And
important polyvagal principle. We met with
exactly.
polyvagal with connecting through polyvagal theory and I think I'm going to make the focus of this video polyvagal in school in for schools kind of thing. I think that would make sense.
100%.
So where we can, let's weave it in a little bit. So when you
Mm,
talk about that leadership and being reflective, that's understanding your nervous system, right? That's understanding
mm.
where you are and how you responded, how your nervous system responded to a particular child or a particular situation.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's also that's the important thing as well as it being in nature, is what it does to your nervous system being outside.
Right.
And there's
There's a
sort of
lot of
like,
research supporting that
yeah,
nature.
tons,
Like if you, yeah,
tons.
there's tons. And then they're trying to bring the nature, the biophilic design into classrooms.
Mm,
I've
mm,
been promoting that, saying even if you
um,
can't get them out, bring it in.
yeah,
To
yeah,
the kids,
100%.
even if they have to be, get out as much as you can, but even inside to bring in some
Yeah,
plants and some fish and, some little critters and just bring some nature into the classroom.
yes, and there's an element of it. I think, honestly can't remember where I read it. It was about play, the blended state, and the idea of practicing sort of when your body down regulates and then up regulates again, you know. And I really found that interesting because with Forest School, one of the principles is holistic development. And one of the examples I use to explain what we mean by that is hide and seek. So if we play hide and seek, very simple kids game. What do? You say, all right, three, two, one, off you go. They get all excitable. They're there, they're in that place state, they're running, 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 running. They go hide, and then they're quiet. Well, that's that practicing, isn't it, of down regulation and into
Yeah.
fight of flight, and then coming back to up regulating into the connected state. But within it as well, if you're in a woodland that has uneven ground, and maybe it has like a lot of branches and things, what's also developing is a proprioceptive sense and a vestibular sense. They're also listening, trying to figure out where the person is. They might be seeing. They're practicing that sort of concentration that you get, and it might also be joy, like sheer enjoyment of just being outside. You might have some of them who really enjoy getting muddy and dirty, and so don't mind getting under bushes and things like that. All of that is within one simple activity of hide and seek, that development that's happening. And with the polyvagal theory, it's then looking at what Forest School already talk about when they talk about holistic development and adding that layer on top. Do you know what I mean? Of the polyvagal
Right.
thing,
And
understanding.
I'm thinking about like the three C's of safety. We've got choice, we have connection, we have
Hmm.
context. And I'm wondering for those students, if they're, they must be feeling safe to go hike, right? That
Hmm.
nobody's
Hmm.
going to
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
after them when they're hike, that there's a
Yep.
sense of safety that has to have already and some choice. Their choice is like, where are you going to hide, right? They've got some choice in
Yes.
where they're going to
Yeah.
go. And then obviously they'd be connected to you, the leader who's ever leading that activity. That
Yes.
that all creates that sense of safety, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And
Yeah.
there's two things there. The first is because I created a company. It's called the Forest Folk,
It's
and it's
called the
a
forest
social
what?
the Forest Folk, FOLK, the
Oh,
Forest Folk.
okay. So
And it
do you call them students? What do you call the kids in the forest?
Well, I don't really. It's we refer to them in forest school as participants. But I found often when I'm talking to groups of people, I say hi, folks. I just do it. I do it anyway.
You say
And so
what?
hi, folks.
Hi,
F
folks.
O
Oh,
L K S, and that's where sort of the forest folk kind of thing came from. It's already talking about that.
so hi
And
like
I
an
think
H-I-G-H, like
yeah,
hi.
as in
Not
hello. Yeah.
hi.
No, not hi. No, no. As in hello, folks. Um, but the yeah, so with the company, you always have to think about values, and it sort of stressed me out. Yeah, anyway, and I came across three values that are quite polyvagal informed, which are calm, curious, connected. So at every point, myself, and if I have a team or volunteers or staff with me, at every point, interactions with everyone else, they can be however they want to be, but actually we are calm, we are curious, we are connected.
So we are
And I
calm,
think
curious, and collected,
connected,
connected. Okay. Yeah,
mm,
that makes
which makes more sense now.
yeah. I was like,
Yeah,
Well, collected meaning we're so yeah, calm, cool, and calm, curious, and connected. I like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and because it's simple and easy to remember, and that's what sort of values should be, right? It's sort of easy to apply in situations.
Well, that
And so,
curiosity is so important, and that we talk about that in polyvagal world instead of looking at a behavior and trying to squash it initially right off the bat, unless it's unsafe and unsafe to
hmm
others around. It would be, "Well, I'm kind of curious what's going on with that."
hmm hmm
Like I have an activity in one of my activities in my polyvagal course. It has a little raccoon. The restless raccoon is a sign of sympathetic, and he has little boxing gloves on, and he just kind of, they do a little step box like this, when they see that little icon. But
hmm
one of the therapists said, we can't do that because this one kid hits the wall all the time really hard. Well,
hmm
we would look at that. You and I would probably look at that as what's the input?
mm
That's why is that kid,
mm
hitting that wall? Why is that child hitting that wall? And could there be some input that's needed?
hmm
Some deep pressure that we can do, have
hmm
him
hmm
do, to get in his body, right? He's looking for some kind
mm
of like, I'm alive here, you
Yes.
know? And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, and so the therapist said, I'm just not doing that activity anymore. And I'm thinking, well, I understand if you feel like it's unsafe, he's going to break his hand or something. But I
Hmm
think being curious around why the need for that much
Yeah,
input, right?
yeah, yeah. And it actually speaks to a wider thing that we're very risk averse when it comes to kids.
We really are.
Um, and interestingly, one of the principles of forest school is risk taking. So we follow a risk benefit approach. Yes, it's risky. Can we remove everything we can remove from it to make it not lethal? And then actually, can they just crack on? Because the only way kids learn how to dynamically risk assess is by dynamically risk assessing. Do you know what I mean? And sort of being doing a thing, realizing, oh wait, that hurt when I did that thing, or oh damn, I just fell out of that tree. I'm gonna make sure that X, Y, and Z next time. I'll give you an example. It's only a little thing, but I in one of my sessions we were building dens. So I'd shoved this branch. It was only about this thick, but I'd shoved this branch into the ground. Anyway, that group left. Another group came on. There were about 11. There was only about three or four of them. And this kid saw the branch. He was like, "Can I kick it?" And I was like, "Yeah, go on then." And so he boots it really hard. And he's like, "Ah, my foot, my foot." And I was like, "What have we learned?" He goes, "Don't kick sticks." And I was like, "Great," and just walked off. I was like, "That's a lesson.
Right.
He's not broken. Like he's like kids are anti-fragile. It's almost like their bodies need bumps, scrapes, cuts to realize what environment they're in, as well as like having their hands in dirt, on lichen, on trees. Like there's so much that they need for their bodies to start adjusting to their ecosystem and building up immunities where it needs to. And so yeah, that thing of that kid's punching the wall, then stop it rather than going actually maybe that kid needs to punch something. So
Right.
instead, maybe we do the risk benefit approach and we get him a boxing bag. Do you know what I mean? And maybe actually what we do is help him channel the energy, so let's teach him some boxing moves. Like maybe that's just how his body feels good is to punch stuff. Let's redirect it. Do you know what I mean? Like I was
Love it.
from your
Yeah.
book. Yeah, the idea. Yeah, yeah, the idea of that sort of disorganized mobilizing energy. Do you know what I mean? And sort of how do we organize it? Like that's so it's literally so forest school in a way, like because it's never sort of no. It's just like how can we? And so yeah, it's really good. And to the other thing I wanted to talk about was safety. Like the idea of safety is so important. And again, one of the forest school principles is community, building like a micro community where I think I read it in an article about micro communities, and it said space becomes place when we share meaning or we share experiences together in that space.
Oh, that is so
Um,
nice. Say that. So
yeah,
space becomes place when we,
place when we share experiences together.
I love it.
Yeah, and that brings safety, doesn't it? and being known brings safety. So the first thing I'm saying to people is we should be building relationships, full stop. Like that is the first thing. Everything else can wait. Because if a child comes to you and they're basically not in this sense, but they're basically rabid, like you telling them no, don't do that, get down, get off, isn't really going to help much. But you coming alongside and helping redirect to something interesting, something fun, something whatever, that starts to build something. Starts to build something, which then actually they can become healthier versions of themselves rather than these sort of unhealthy reactive versions because they're constantly stressed, constantly stressed. You can take some of that stress away, then they can start to act instead. Yeah, relationships are so important.
How did the high folks, how did they find you as opposed to being put into these other schools that are just seem kind of abusive? So how did they
So
get a
when
choice, or how did the lucky ones get to go to you and at the forest school?
Yeah, so they'll only come to me for maybe a morning or an afternoon or even sometimes a full day. But I'm approaching schools, so I currently have a primary special school. And it's the only primary special school in that part of town. And I think they have a waiting list of like nearly 1,000 kids. And so
You have a waiting
uh,
list of 1,000?
no, this special school does.
Oh, the
I don't.
special,
I
but
don't.
even
It's the
still, the
actual
special
school.
school with 1,000.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's sad. It's sad. But a friend of mine works there, and his boss was like, his head teacher was like, I want a forest school, and he's like, well, I know a guy who runs a company. And so I went in and I really vibed with the head teacher because one thing I'm keen on is not working with organizations that don't see the kids how I see the kids. Because I'm like, you're just using me to sort of tick a box. And I'm not particularly interested in that because actually we work with them, but then they go back into the traumatizing environment. And sometimes I think I don't know, I'm split on this. I wonder sometimes if it's better not to taste a roast dinner if all we've had is grog
Uh,
until you
yeah.
can have it every day. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? I think sometimes it could be more torturous to have that one experience if the rest of the framework and the system isn't helping. But then at the same time, it only takes one emotionally available adult to mitigate some chronic trauma. And so it's a bit of a split. But the way it works at the moment is I'm being recommended by others. And then I'm going and meeting these people. Like I have, as well as working with a school, I work privately one to one. And I have a mother who's reached out to me. And so we're meeting together with the child on Tuesday to go for an hour walk and just see if they want to, see if the kid wants to spend time with me. Because if they don't, there's no point starting it. It's just not for them. Um, yeah, so that's sort of how it works. I don't. Yeah, it's at the beginning of its journey, the business, and so in terms of like a referral process and all that stuff, it will probably come. But at the moment, it's through my own relationships of people suggesting it and stuff. Nowadays, I think it's ironic that my job is basically getting paid to do what I did as a kid for kids who don't do that. I'm like, I had that for free. Like,
Different
it's mad.
times. It's definitely different
Yeah,
times right now. A
definitely.
lot of mental
Yeah,
health issues going on, a lot of things
yeah,
going on with children and young adults today. And a polyvagal concept that I really love is the sharing your nervous system. So if you're
yes.
regulated in the forest and you've got somebody who's really dysregulated, sharing your
Mhm,
regulated nervous system. That's what you're doing. Why, let's do
mhm,
this
mhm.
project together. Let's work on this together, right? They're next to somebody who's regulated and you
Yes.
model that for them. They get to see it. And I think there's just a physiological connection. We don't know, but
Mhm,
I would
mhm.
say there's some kind of physiological connection, heart to heart, like all the heart math stuff that,
Yes.
within
Yes.
6 feet out, your heart is connecting. You've got this
Mhm,
diameter around you of people that
mhm.
you're connecting with as well.
Yeah, I came across something about co-regulation because often we talk about it like it's a thing we have to do. But what I was reading essentially was saying we're always co-regulating. Like we're always sending out signals of safety, if it's safe. We go
Yes.
to a restaurant, right? And everybody is giving out these signals of safety unconsciously without us even realizing. So everybody's already co-regulating. It's those children that are unable to read that,
Uh,
unable to hear that, to feel that. And this is what it comes down to for me is I don't really like using the term dysregulation because their system is working perfectly well. Like it is seen a threat and it has done what everybody else is doing in response to the threat. For me, the problem is a misperception of the threat.
uh,
And I know that that's been called faulty neuroception. Interestingly, there's someone called the trauma geek. Her name's Janae Elizabeth. And she's written some blogs and some essays, and she has some other things, and she does a lot on nervous systems. She actually uses like I think it's like a five-part model now, which polyvagal's one of them. Um, but within it, she was talking about let's not talk about faulty neuroception, but a sensitive neuroception or a neurocept. It's just a
oh,
reframing of the
I love
words.
that. And I love
Yeah.
that concept of instead of dysregulation, we're reading it, we're regulating perfectly correct for what we're reading, the
Hmm.
danger that we're reading
Yeah.
in this particular situation.
Yeah. And then
That's an
also
interesting.
sometimes it isn't a misperception of threat. Sometimes actually, for whatever reason, it is a threat to the person, and our understanding is a misunderstanding. But the only way you know that is by knowing the person.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an important thing in terms of co-regulation and misperception of threat. But there's another thing that irked me and does irk me about the British special educational system is they often we have something called a education, health and care plan. This is given to children who basically can't cope in mainstream. This then allows them to go to a special school. Often when I'm reading it, it will say things like so and so plays football to self regulate. So and so does this to self regulate. And I'm like, they don't self regulate, though, do they? That's self control. Like the self regulation hasn't actually occurred. They've just got distracted by something else. And for some people, that is a form of it. But for me, you put that child back into that situation that made them down regulate, they're gonna down regulate again because they haven't actually found that situation safe anymore. And so it's actually like trying to really understand what's happening with children. Is if for me, I'm like, if adults are struggling to self-regulate, you're telling me this 11-year-old child that's been traumatized by institutions and other people can self-regulate. Or if they just learn how to mask, have they learned how to shut off? Have they learned how to say yes, please until they can be left alone? So that's my approach with kids, and this is how the polyvagal theory has helped. Is I already had a sort of understanding of relationships, but it gave me a real understanding of sort of nervous systems, and actually being able to hazard a guess about what's happening within a child without labeling emotions, without labeling intent, anything like that. Being able to see a child once someone said something to someone, they get up and they punch a door. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like it's just it's so simple, and you're like, obviously they don't feel safe anymore. Because that's the other thing that's really stuck out to me is seeing things in the lens of safety and threat. And so whenever I'm seeing somebody who's acting in a way that looks down-regulated, okay, how are they feeling threatened? How do they feel safe again? It's a yeah, it's an
So you
interesting one.
use the term down regulated. I don't think that's a
Mm.
really popular term here as much. So down regulated would mean explain down regulated.
Down the autonomic ladder,
Okay.
up the autonomic ladder. Yeah.
So would they be moving into sympathetic and into dorsal vagal
Mm, mm,
shutdown?
mm.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And maybe that's
yeah,
what do they use that term maybe more in the mental health field with polyvagal? Because I was trying to translate into
I don't.
education and I hadn't heard
Yeah,
that
no,
term
no,
that
I
much.
don't. Yeah, no, it's I don't know where I came across it.
I
But
like it.
I don't.
I
Yeah,
like
I
that
don't.
term. Because that,
Yeah.
I know the ladder, some people really love the ladder and some people don't, but when I've shared that, the autonomic ladder with teachers and support staff, they tend to like it. My book too, I really couldn't use it because it's Deb Dana's intellectual property and it's part of Norton's
Mm,
copyright.
mm,
So I could
mhm,
use the ladder. I had to pay to use the ladder, even though Norton published the book. I had to pay Norton to use the ladder in book one, Polyvagal Theory, the Polyvagal Path to Joyful Learning. And then, so in book two, I did sort of the path. It's almost like the forest path because it has the whole backpack and they're
Of
on a
course it does.
path and they have
Yeah.
trees. And I use the analogy of when the
Mm,
tree falls on the path as
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
sympathetic. Like, what are
yeah,
you
yeah,
going to do?
yeah,
Are you going to panic? Are you going to climb over it? Are you going to go
yeah,
around it? Are you
yeah,
going to cut
yeah.
through it? Or are you just going to be stuck? Are you just going to go,
Mhm,
oh,
mhm,
there's this big tree in my way. I can't get around. I'm
mhm,
just going to be stuck here. And that's how I picture a
mhm.
lot of kids in sympathetic. They just get
Yes.
stuck in there. That's their
Yeah,
place that they
yeah,
love hanging out in that
yeah,
sympathetic kind of learned helplessness. I don't know what to do about all of this. So for
yeah,
me, doing just one, not a green, a yellow, a red, just they're just on the path and they're on the path
yes.
heading to wherever they want to go in life and
Mhm,
what are the obstacles. And so the path right, so down regulated path would be, first they're in the
mm,
backpack and they're exploring and they feel free
mhm,
and they're curious and they're exploring, that's
mhm,
ventral. And then they go into sympathetic, and then that's like that something's in the way. It could be a bear, it could be whatever. Something's crossed their path, right? And they're afraid and they don't know what to do next. And I have the backpack kind of on the ground with everything scattered. All their papers and books are
mhm,
scattered,
mhm,
right? Disorganized. And then the one that's not even barely on the path, and his backpack's just sitting off. It's empty. There's nothing in it. There's no tools. He's
mhm,
just not, it hasn't even started. And I think when you
mhm,
get some of your high folks into your program, you're probably like, where are they? Where have they started? Are they not even on the path yet? Or are they kind of sympathetic to me? At least you're moving, you're doing something. It may
mhm,
not be as dysregulated as we'd like, but at least there's some action and there's some energy and there's some
mhm, mhm,
movement,
mhm.
right? Whereas the
Yeah, yeah,
shutdown,
yeah,
I'd much rather work with those kids that have some movement going, which were most of the kids.
yeah,
But the shutdown, those take a lot of time and nurturing and being with and sitting with and
yeah,
to get them to kind of start moving and moving on the
yeah.
path to wherever they're heading or just enjoying the path. They don't necessarily have to be going anywhere. They're just looking
Of
around and
course.
enjoying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because
This child I'm meeting on Tuesday is like that. Really struggling with life and stuff. Um, and it's I think as well in like my experience in schools with the children who have been labelled as having social, emotional, mental health difficulties, there is once you know the child, you can also know what the reason is behind. And I'll give you an example. So there was a child who was about 12 in one of the schools I worked in. He was told he wasn't allowed to play football. And so he was getting his football boots out
he
at
was
break.
told he wouldn't last
He wasn't allowed to play football.
or wasn't allowed to play football.
For whatever reason. I can't even remember why. Someone
Is
said
that
he wasn't allowed.
soccer?
Yeah, soccer. Yeah, soccer. And
Want to
so
just
he,
clarify for our listeners.
of course, I appreciate your interpretation. But but yeah, so he had his boots, his soccer boots out, getting ready. And a staff member saw him, walked up to him and said, "You're not allowed to play." Took the ball. Now immediately he went into fight and he just squared up to him and things were getting heated. I inserted myself between them, took the ball from the staff member, told the staff member to go inside, turned around and gave the ball back to the child. Do you know what happened? Immediately melted, went back to normal. Because for him, it was disrespect that he was reacting to. It wasn't anything else. And so if you understand what a child's culture is and where they're from, then you can understand actually what the reason behind the thing is. And in all honesty, that staff member going up and taking that ball was disrespectful.
It'd be
Like,
anybody would feel like that. Anybody would get
of
mad.
course, Yes, yeah, yeah.
We
And
would
so
do
it,
that.
yeah. But there's a difference. So some students would have got mad and stayed there, whereas for him, he learned how to switch on the
Huh?
violence and switch it off again. So he used violence as a tool. And so once you understood that about him, you knew that actually there were ways of working with him. And you try and talk to him later, just like you would with most people. Try and talk to him later. But in that moment, having to address that so that it didn't spiral out of control. And this is the one thing again that frustrated me about the schools is the environment. The environment is down regulating. Like it just causes kids to get angry or to get frustrated, and it's not necessarily the staff's fault. They're trying to do the best they can. You have a lot of people who have kids and then they treat these kids like their kids, which isn't good because I'm like, what works for your child is not going to
Yeah.
work with this one.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, again, polyvagal theory really helped me be curious about how their nervous systems respond. Because I think it was in your book, either it stated it or sort of thought about it, but it is really freeing that if a child is down-regulated, in the conversation afterwards, you could say, "Isn't it awesome that your nervous system wants to protect you?" Yeah,
Yeah.
and so there's no shame. There's no why
No,
did you get
it's a
angry or
friend
why did you
within.
get
It's
mad?
a friend within who's just
Yeah,
there for you and backing you. And I think if we start looking at it that way, it just changes that. For me, when I learned of Deb Dana's work and started talking with her, it just changed everything. It just changed. I've been
hmm
doing school moves
hmm
forever and ever, but it just finally, I don't know, it put it all together for me. It brought everything
hmm
in alignment. And I was thinking about what you're doing too, like those three forms of regulation, because I know when we read about children's behavior, it's always self-regulate, self-regulate. I mean, circle how many self-regulates we have,
hmm
right? Our focus is so much on self-regulation, and we know the nervous system needs self-regulation, it needs co-regulation, and needs
Yeah,
socially shared. And I can see in
yes,
your forest school, you're hide and seek, you're socially sharing, everybody's involved in
hmm
it. And
yeah,
then you say, well, let's do this and let's build this together. You're working one on one or with another couple
hmm
students. That's you're co-regulating. And then at some point they go off into the forest by
yep,
themselves and say,
yep,
I
yep,
want to do this. I'm going to go build this, or I'm going to
yeah,
climb
yeah,
this tree, right? So you can
yeah, yeah,
actually see those three forms of regulation and
yes,
how healing it is for our nervous system and how
yeah, yeah, yeah,
healthy, not even healing, but even healthy it
yeah,
is for, there's times when we want to socially share. There's times we want to go to a little gathering of people
hmm
somewhere and listen to some music, whatever. And then there's times when you just want to hang out one on one with a friend, go to lunch
hmm
and have a real intimate conversation.
yeah, of
And then there's
course,
times when you just want to be reading your book by yourself in your room, shut the door,
hmm
nobody bother me, right? And I feel like that's what we sort of miss in schools is
yeah,
focusing so much, like so many of the we have in the US IEP goals, individual
hmm
education planning goals. And so many times it'll say the student will self-regulate during blah blah blah, or and I encourage people this. We never see this
yeah,
the child will co-regulate with another
yes,
child
yeah, yeah,
doing math, blocks or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
You never see that the child will be in a socially shared environment and feel part of the group.
hmm
In my mind, we have to do more of that, less focus
yes,
on
yes,
self
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah,
itself is just only one kind, and yet
yeah,
it's given 90% of the focus, and the other two get 5 and 5. And we need to realize it's 33 and a half, like 33 and a third.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah,
they're all important,
yeah,
and I can see when when the when the children are out with you, they're getting to choose that. They're getting to
hmm
do the group work or the two on the one-on-one or the by
hmm
themselves. Like, what is your nervous system needing today? And today they
yeah,
may need that quiet time with sitting by a tree reading a book.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
they
yeah,
they
100%.
need somebody to be sitting with them to share and
Yeah,
to connect with when they're feeling really alone in something. So I just feel like
yeah,
what a perfect way to look at. regulation in nature and see it in all its
Mm.
forms.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I've been toying with an idea that I wonder if self-regulation is actually a temporary measure until we can get to a co-regulator. Because even when we self-regulate, what do we often do? We go and tell someone about it. Oh, I had this experience. We connect again.
I
And I
do.
wonder if actually if co-regulation is larger than self-regulation, which isn't necessarily, it's not a problem. There's ecosystems with trees. So like trees are connected through the fungi mycelial network. And it's this just this connection, like the gut in the bacteria in our gut. Do you know what I mean? Like it's symbiotic. And there's just so many different things. Like in the UK, the English oak, over its life, I think plays host to over 2,000 other species.
Oh,
Like if you want to look at how in nature we're like things are connected and reliant on each other. And I once heard a phrase which is just so apt. It said, in the West, we suffer with an excess of individualism.
yes. Ian McGilchrist's book, you know, his 600-page book, The Divided Brain in a Western World or Western
Mm-mm,
Civilization.
mm-mm, not
So
heard of it.
oh, it's kind of incredible. And he I didn't read the whole thing. I'm just kind of like got the gist of it because it's meaty. But he's a psychologist and he had worked with people with strokes and stuff like that. And he was really looking at what happens when one hemisphere goes offline versus the other.
Hmm.
And so he came to the conclusion that each hemisphere has their preferences on what it likes to do. They work together, but they also have very different jobs that they enjoy doing. And when you talk about self-regulation, individualism, I'm separate from you, that's very much a left hemisphere process. And when you think
Mm,
about how our society has evolved, we've moved away from the collectiveness. We've moved away
hmm,
from play and
hmm.
connecting and working together and being curious and art and all of these things. We've become very linear, very yes,
Yeah,
no, on, off, kind of black, white.
yeah,
And so I think that's a good point that that's probably how we got into the whole self-regulation
yeah,
because it's a worksheet. You do that
yeah.
worksheet
It
by
is.
yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
not to be shared. You're not, I need to know that you
Hmm.
know all the information on this worksheet. You
Hmm.
can't do it with anybody else.
Yep.
And he, you know, his whole stance is that that's kind of what's happened is we've just leaned so much onto left hemisphere processing, linear and the rules and so when you're out in your forest
Mm,
school, you know, you're inviting our right hemisphere, that
mm, mm,
processor that's about curiosity and connection and play and sensory and movement.
mhm,
That's what
mhm.
that right hemisphere is just yearning for. So
Yeah,
they
yeah,
get that out, you know, in that freeness of nature. They're not having to,
yeah.
you're not going to give them a test when they come back in. You're going to have a
No,
test on this when you get
no.
back in.
Yeah, and I found actually in that, talking about environment being a trigger, often in places like forest school, the main trigger is interpersonal. And so and students having social problems, right? Social difficulties. So in forest school, there's something called constructive conflict.
Constructive,
Um,
I'll repeat it after you. Constructive conflict. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, constructive conflict. And my way of looking at that is you basically let the kids figure it out. So it's about there's this phrase that one of the sort of well-respected forest school leaders use. He teaches a lot of people. It's wait. Why am I talking? It's that idea of does the
Mm,
adult always need to mediate? Does the adult always need to get involved? I'll give you an example. In my last school, we had a student, she'd been to forest school before. We had a new student who hadn't. This student had been to forest school. She was collecting sticks to build a den. The new student was a bit nervous. At one point, he decided he wanted to join in. So he stood up and picked up one of the sticks. That caused the problem. So then you had both of them either side of a stick saying, "It's my stick, it's my stick, it's my stick." And the teaching assistant who I was with, went to intervene. I sort of signaled to her to sort of back off, just leave it for a moment. Um, and there's this thing that I read about called sports casting. I think they use it in early years, but it's where you just talk like a sportscaster. So what I did was I looked at them while they're doing it. I went, two students are fighting over a stick. And both of them sort of paused and like looked at me and a bit like, huh? And then they carried on for a bit. And then I sort of walked around a bit more. And I was like, I wonder what happens if one of them pulls too hard. And they sort of looked at me again, like, what's this weirdo doing? And then they carried on. And they kept going. So I just got involved as one of them. I grabbed the stick and I just started going, I want to build it for my wall. And they were like, no, my wall, no, my wall, no, my wall. Anyway, this totally new student was sitting on a log, not sure what to make of anything, stood up and was like, stop, stop, stop. Started mediating. He was 11. Started mediating. Who got the stick first? Where was it? Who wants to do what? I just took a step back. Now that is a much better learning experience than if I stepped in straight away and said, that's not fair. Life's not fair. Like if these kids don't learn how to persuade, they don't learn how to negotiate, or if they don't know how to move on. So if I've got a kid on a hammock and two other kids want to have a go, and they come up to me and say, "Tell him to get off because he's been on there for ages," I'm like, "Find something else, or give him something else to get off that, or persuade him somehow to switch it out." Like it's not a right that you go on a hammock, and so these are also the lessons that children can learn in a safe space. So in that moment when they don't get what they want, they can downregulate because there's someone who understands and there's a space and we can work that out together. There's no punishment. There's no sort of ostracization. You're still accepted. You're still welcome. And so that for me is a really important part as well. Is adults not taking away their power, not taking away their ability. Now, obviously, age appropriate. Because
Yeah,
if they don't
yeah,
understand,
yeah,
then you've got to role model and scaffold that learning.
right.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
Vygotsky scaffolding for sure. Well, Deb Dana says there has to always be one regulated nervous system in the room, okay? One ventral vagal, and but it doesn't
yeah,
have to be the adult.
no,
And in that story,
yeah,
you were regulated, but I mean, this child,
yeah. Acting down regulators, yeah.
yeah, this other person was this child was regulated and was able to step
Hmm.
in a very regulated
Hmm.
place and
Yeah.
and so much happens. They get to the other two get to see it. They get to see
Hmm.
somebody, their peer, handling
Hmm.
something well. It's being
Yep.
modeled by somebody that they probably respect more than an adult at this point in their life.
Yeah.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
I'm still not clear on downregulated in the way you're using it because now you just said um, that child stepped in and was able to downregulate, right? Is that what you said?
Mediate.
Okay, mediate. Thank you. I was like, because I'm thinking downregulate is kind of when you're moving down into
Yeah, no.
dysregulation.
They were able to mediate.
Mediate. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's the miracle though of this work that we do because
Hmm.
it can be so helpful. And a lot of times they'll say like it's one person, you have one person in your life. Like I can think back like a teacher, I can think back on a landlord I had she was an
Hmm.
amazing person. Like there were just people that showed up to say, you're safe, you're okay,
Hmm.
you're loved,
Hmm.
you're
Yeah.
enough, you know, all those things that we yearn to hear, right? When we're in these situations.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you
for
can
sure.
be, you know, in the forest schools, that's what I see
Mm.
that you'll end
Mm.
up being for many of
Yes.
these children and young adults. You're going to be
Well, that's
that.
the hope.
They say it takes one person. It doesn't take, you
Yeah.
know, they say it takes a village to raise, but the science tells us that sometimes it's one person shows up to
Yeah.
say, I see you.
Hmm.
I love you just as you are. You know,
Yeah.
it can be really, really powerful. So you're in such an amazing position to be in
Mm.
and what you're going to be able to accomplish They're going to come back to you years and years from now. They're going to say, they'll come back. They'll start saying, I'm okay and I'm here because of this. Especially if
Mm.
they get to spend a year.
Yeah, or sometimes more. And one thing I think that's really important, I once have people who are involved in sort of politics and protesting and stuff like that, and someone was once trying to encourage me, so you should get involved in this, that, and the other, yeah. And I was like, to be honest, I'm a small picture man.
You're a
Like I
what?
struggle, small picture man. I struggle with that sort of big picture stuff. If I, across my life, can help 100 traumatized children be healthy, then that's possibly stopping 100 traumatized families from existing in the future, which then has a knock-on effect if no trauma re-enters. And I'm like, not a lot of people are as generationally thinking as we used to be. Like, yeah, the world is difficult at the moment with certain things, and yes, it's really hard for certain other people. But actually, I'm much more about what can I do now, what seeds can I plant, and actually to see them grow. Um, because actually, if every generation does that, then surely it only just gets better. So
Absolutely.
it's yeah.
I really enjoyed our conversation. Is there
Don't worry.
anything else you feel like you really want to say that we haven't talked about? Well, I'd love to, let's just stay in touch. And as
Hmm.
you have these stories to tell about the children in the forest, I know that our community is going to want to know more. Like,
Yeah.
let's plan to like reconnect in a few months or whatever, whenever you have some good stories or
Yeah,
some,
yeah, yeah.
interesting insights. I think it
Let's
would
do
be
it.
really fun to follow you and to,
Yeah,
to see how things are progressing
that'd be
and
awesome.
yeah, yeah. I've really, I'm so glad you reached out and the email you sent to me about my book, I actually put in a little frame because it meant so much to
Oh,
me.
did you?
I did because, when you release a book to the world, it's shockingly quiet. Like
Yeah,
it's unless you're a New York Times bestseller or whatever, people
yeah.
think everybody's already sharing with you how they feel
Mm,
about the book, but it's really very quiet and you wonder,
wow.
did this make a difference for anybody? Hello? So
You know,
when your email came in, it was just so kind and I really appreciated it. And like you, if there's one person, if there's,
yeah,
looking at the small picture, well, thank you for taking the
yeah,
time. You must be
yeah,
tired.
you
You've been
too.
out in the forest all day today.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Been wonderful. Yeah, so it's a new woodland that I've secured
I
for
know, I was so envious. I'm
delivering.
thinking, oh my gosh, I see something just to go to work in the forest. Like
Yeah,
that's so many people's dream. I'm going to work right now. Out to the forest I go.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's
well,
fun.
it was delightful. Thank you for all the
It
work you're
was.
doing for those
Well,
kids.
thank you.
They need
Yeah,
you.
you too.
Keep it up.
Yeah,
Let's stay in
yeah.
touch.
All the best.